Hello, my name is Dr. Lessa, and I teach Maritime Law at Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands. I would like to talk to you about the impact of Corona or COVID-19 on seafarers and port state control. But before I start sharing my views with you, I would like to thank the Center of Maritime Law of the National Law University of Rhodesia for such an invitation, and also Mr. Harry Narayan for recommending me. I think that by now we all have seen the impact. We all have felt the impact of Corona in our lives, and we possibly have already recognized the impact that it had on trade. Because whenever we go to the supermarkets, we can see some empty shelves. We can see that some products are missing. At least this is the reality of a lot of countries nowadays. So definitely there was an impact on shipping. Also, we see that borders have been closed. There are no flights. Flights are being cancelled. We have seen that the warranty to nominate a safe port, although the threshold is quite high in order to a port to be actually recognized as being unsafe, has become way more difficult with Corona. Some ports, because of the virus and the impact that the virus had in the country, are considered more unsafe than others. So even this warranty in charter parties became more difficult to be complied. Therefore, no doubt, seafarers have been, suffered a severe impact because of it. For once, seafarers are hired most often for a period of time, and after this period of time is finished, they have to fall back to their homes. Seafarers are international, so the crews we can have crews that have each one of their seafarers is from a different country in the world. The main exporter of seafarers that we have right now is Philippines. India is also one country that has many seafarers, and the Philippines has closed their borders. Flights are not flying to the Philippines. India has relaxed a bit right now in terms of because in terms of value trade and giving seafarers a little bit of flexibility to board vessels. They only have to pass to test for COVID, and the test should be negative. They have to disclose with the ship owner everything, all the health status, everything that they'll be doing for the past 28 days in order to be allowed on board. But nevertheless, Philippines, other countries have completely closed their borders, meaning that the seafarers cannot go back home after their contract is expired. Also meaning that the seafarers cannot start a new contract, because if the seafarers are in the country, they're in lockdown. So they can also not fly away to go to the vessel in another port, in another country. So contracts have been stopped for this reason. And a lot of the times, companies like Maersk, instead of starting with new seafarers, they just renew the contract of the old crew. So a crew that was about to have their contract ended or go for leave or to go on leave or holidays had the contract renewed. So they would not run the risk of put another crew on board of the vessel that with one of the crew members being contaminated, and they would be able to remain on trade. Nevertheless, this caused a lot of problems, because seafarers are allowed to have hours of rest. Fatigue is a major problem in terms of maritime accidents. A lot of them are due to fatigues, to seafarers to seafarers being very tired or stressed. So this change of the contract, this renewal, has not been seen with good eyes by the International Transport Workers Federation, necessarily because of fatigue. Standard A2.3 of the Maritime Labor Convention, that can be called a code of minimum rights for seafarers, provides that seafarers should be allowed some shore leave in order to rest, some time on shore leave in order to rest. this is impossible nowadays because countries are in lockdown. So if you go to the port, it's unlikely that you're going to leave the port area, because tests, like we have to think the test for corona can also take a few days for the results to be out. There is a problem there, and seafarers can be also contaminating the country. So all these things are a problem. So we have that fatigue nowadays can be quite problematic for seafarers. We have that regulation 2.5 that deals with repatriation cannot be met. Like regulation 2.5, like specifically states that the ship owner has the burden to, like, let's say that has this, I said burden, but burden probably is not the most appropriate word, has the responsibility to repatriate the seafarers, covering all costs of repatriation, unless the seafarer has done, like the seafarer has done something in terms of bad conduct and it is responsible for his or her dismissal. But these are rare cases. But nevertheless, not because the ship owner doesn't want to repatriate the seafarer, the situation is quite complicated. There are no flights. We also have that the International Labor Organization, the International Maritime Organization, are worried about seafarers, and all they have been doing is actually giving seafarers a lot of guidelines how to keep themselves safe on board of a vessel. They most likely share WHO guidelines, the World Health Organization guidelines for seafarers. But they also worry about the seafarer mental health with all these issues coming along. Therefore, the International Transport Workers Federation has already provided a map for seafarers so they would know where ITF inspectors are located, so they can contact ITF inspectors if there is anything going wrong. We also have, so as you can see, all this can be problematic. We also have that isolation on board of a vessel is a bit different than isolation on land. It's unlikely that a person that is on board of a vessel will actually not contaminate the rest of the crew. It's quite unlikely, and is also way more dramatic, if you may say so, especially when you go from one port to another. And a lot of the times, especially nowadays with all this port state control and all the risks that countries are having in terms of contamination, seafarers a lot of the times are not even able to stay in the ports long enough to be able to acquire all the provisions they need. They are not able, especially to stay in port long enough for this, if they're coming from certain other ports that are considered to be high-risk areas. So a lot of the time, seafarers are not even able to actually find and actually board the vessels, like fill the vessels with provisions, the provisions that they need. So this comes that it's not even about the ship owner not fulfilling its obligations towards the seafarers. It's also the fact that, like, it's impossible. The contamination is not allowing this. And we see a lot of in trade, but we saw that it really affects, like, the shipping, the cruise shipping industry. A lot of cruise ships were actually stopped, and it was people were prevented to leave the vessel. A lot of cruise ships were actually blamed for spreading the virus. A lot of cruise ships could not actually anchor in any port. They're really stranded at sea. So we saw that affect that. So it definitely affects seafarers in trade as well. I think if you think about these, you have to think also that if you think about the virus, we also have to consider that seafarers can actually get contaminated on board of the vessels. This happened particularly with cruise ships, as I just mentioned. A lot of seafarers got the virus. Actually, virus, not necessarily corona, all other virus, they spread very easily, especially in cruise ships. There has been other cases of virus and cruise ships being contaminated virus. So it's not a new thing, but the spread of corona is a new thing for the world, not only for the shipping industry. So there was a case of seafarers being contaminated while in work. And for this, we have that the Maritime Labour Convention provides for healthcare, that the ship owner needs to offer seafarers healthcare. And meaning that the ship owner needs to pay for all the costs of everything that the seafarer needs in order to be healthy again. So the seafarers will not be left stranded, like in a foreign country, without any assistance whatsoever. So this is a part that we can consider covered, because even protection indemnity clubs will actually cover such costs. And especially because the Maritime Labour Convention provides for a financial security fund that can be directly activated by seafarers. So this is not an area that is particularly problematic for seafarers. But fatigue, mental distress, all these are areas that right now is very, very problematic. Acquiring provisions, everything's quite problematic. Let's imagine being in isolation of a vessel for a period of 1 year, going to port and have limited provisions on board. If isolation has been difficult for us, imagine how a seafarer must be feeling, being without contacting their family for a long period of time, not having any news, not seeing their family. It can be quite frustrating, and we have to imagine that crews are actually not usually small, not takeaway cruise ships. Crews aboard the foil tankers or container vessels, they don't go above 16 persons whatsoever. So we usually have 16 seafarers at most in ships. So you can see that it's quite isolated. We also have to think that stevedores have to protect themselves, pilots as well in terms of port. So there is all this protection that really prevents seafarers from socializing, from having some sort of socialization. And mental stress is already a problem among seafarers, regardless of the virus, of the existence of the virus. It has for a very long time been a problem among seafarers. So now it has just increased a bit. So a lot of international trade, International Transport Federation, International Transport Workers Federation, as well as some non-profit organizations like the National Mission of Seafarers. They are providing also some sort of hotlines. As I said, ITF has already provided a map where you can find each ITF inspectors, so seafarers can contact them. If you go to port state control, what happened in terms of port state control right now is that the International Maritime Organization has set up a roundtable with port states to actually discuss that trade cannot stop. The trade is vital, so they have to continue with trade. And the port states authorities, they actually see that the International Maritime Organization has indeed a point. And they actually all said that they will work together towards this goal to not stop trade. So they would do their best to keep global supply chain and trade cargo going, and that merchant ships can continue to berth at terminals to carry out cargo operations, facilitate closer coordination by establishing an open communication channel so that like-minded port and maritime authorities can share experience, exchange information about corona, while safeguarding unimpeded maritime trade, continue to adopt best practice in according to national circumstances, including precautionary measures for shipping community, advisories and assistance for shore personnel and ship crew, safe handling of cargos, and measures taken dealing with corona cases. So these are all agreement that the port state authorities actually set in this roundtable. So trade will continue to go on. But nevertheless, this doesn't take away in terms of port inspections, how port authorities are actually dealing with such a thing. But then if you take the example of the Paris Memorandum of Understanding that sets guidelines for port state control, at least for 27 ports that are actually members of this Memorandum of Understanding. And they're most Europeans, but we also have Canada and Russia who are member of the Paris Memorandum of Understanding. And we also have like the Tokyo Memorandum of Understanding, a lot of other memorandums of understanding that set guidelines for port authorities in terms of port state controls. And they all seem to be following the same guidelines. And the same guidelines are saying that the ports are going to be open, they're going to try to provide provisions, enough provisions. And the inspections, especially inspections, is up to the port to see if they are actually going to inspect the vessel or not. But if you read the guidelines carefully, it seems that inspections are going to be put a bit on hold for this period of time, because to have inspections, you're also actually submitting your inspectors to probably to some sort of contagious, and they're also submitting seafarers to actually other persons, so it can be quite problematic. Isolation can be breached. So it seems as they are leaving inspection in the sense that it's only if it is utmost necessary to do so. But they also became more relaxed in terms of like certificates, how to require certificates, in terms of Maritime Labor Convention compliance. They became more relaxed as well. They relaxed the sort of inspections and what is expected from the vessels, especially in terms of like certificates being expired, seafarers training, watchkeeping certificates. They're also being flexible in terms of that. And then we have to think, they also have been extending the deadline to obtain the certificates because of the whole problematic of crew being on board for a long time and contracts being renewed and not be able to go back to their homes. And you also have to think that obviously right now, as I just mentioned before, the vessels are not being able to comply with Maritime Labor Convention because it is literally impossible. So there was all this flexibility in terms of port state control. And we have to think that port state authorities, they look for the certificates of compliance. The first thing that they look is actually to see if the vessel comply with every single international maritime convention out there in terms of safety of sea. So which conventions I'm talking about? SOLAS, MARPOL, STCW, and Maritime Labor Conventions. So these four conventions that are known as the four pillars of quality shipping, they require certificates to be on board. And Port Authority, it requires flag states to know that the vessel is in compliance with these conventions, but they require Port Authority to also check the certificates that are deemed to be prima facie evidence of compliance to check. And port authorities can detain the vessel if something's missing there. If the vessel is not in compliance with these four conventions or standards or provisions of these said conventions. And with the Maritime Labor Convention, one thing that the Maritime Labor Convention brought was like a closer connection between seafarers and onshore personnel, because like seafarers can contact people on port and actually make complaints. But we have to bear in mind, if seafarers make complaints nowadays with fatigue, it's really difficult to be actually to deal with that. Like our seafarers that make complaints about not being repatriated, it's a bit like everyone feels a bit with their hands tied. I, for once, know a lot of seafarers that right now are not being able to start their contracts of employment because they are locked in their own country. There are the talks, there are currently ongoing talks of flag states, port states, and also labor supplying states on how they will do. So you see that India has already make an approach to how they would tackle this problem, by actually allowing seafarers to reach vessels by land, and also allow seafarers to board as long as they do the 28 days full disclosure of the ship owner about what they were doing these 20 days and what the whereabouts, their health state, and also subject to their test, their coronavirus test, come back negative. So we have that there is a trying out there to have like seafarers to have this change and to have like a more compliance, further compliance of these conventions. And I think things will improve once borders start to be open and start to reopen again. But this is all we have to wait and see. But we saw that, like, so I hope that by now we saw that there is an flexibility and adaptation of the industry to this new panorama, international panorama, let's call it like this. There is an adaptation. There is port states are being more flexible. Port authorities are being way more flexible in terms of inspections and in terms of what expected. Certificates are being actually extended, even though right now for a period of 3 months, everything can be revised. There is this worry about seafarers for sure, but there is so much that they can do in terms of like how they'll keep trade and change seafarers, because we have the problems of like lockdowns. We're currently having the problems of lockdowns and flights being canceled, and the problem of like flights being canceled is one problem. Lockdowns another problem, because a seafarer, a Panamanian seafarers, for instance, he will not be allowed to come to Rotterdam, to enter the Netherlands, to go to the port of Rotterdam to board a vessel, for instance. So everything is quite problematic for seafarers. So this extension of the contracts, the way I perceive it was the only way that companies had to keep trade going. And this continuation is also one of the reasons why certificates are actually difficult to be obtained right now, and justify the certificates, the extension of those certificates. It's problematic that the seafarers are not going to have provisions on board. It is problematic. Nobody's denying that. But then we have that isolation is a problem. And these, especially in terms of provisions, should be something that should be taken more under consideration. We have that fatigue in terms of provisions of the Maritime Labour Convention dealing with fatigue. They are not being able to be met, not because of the ship owner, but mostly because of isolation and restrictions that, in fact, all of us are facing right now. We have that Regulation 2.5 is also not being able to be met, that is dealing with repatriation, because, as I said prior, it is impossible to be met. Nevertheless, we do have provision 4 of the Maritime Labour Convention dealing with health. That so far, I think in terms of seafarers, it has been one of the best provisions in terms of Corona, in terms of dealing with seafarers, is this provision. Is also the provision, and there is also provision of the Maritime Labour Convention, saying if the seafarer is actually diseased on board of a vessel, and we have had cases of seafarers being contaminated with Corona and passing away, the ship owner is also liable for all the costs. So, like repatriation of the body, etc., etc., and also have to actually pay their family is entitled of retribution as well. So we have this out there. We have the ship owners are trying to comply to the best that they can to actually ensure that everything's met, but it is quite difficult. We have the port authorities have the notion that trade should continue, and therefore they should do the best to guarantee it will do so. And these imply little bit of flexibility, relaxing a bit their rules, their guidelines, relaxing particular inspection, because inspection can be quite problematic in terms of putting in danger. We have there are a lot of private stakeholders such as ITF or mission of seafarers are trying the best to provide seafarers with some sort of comfort, the best they can, to avoid mental distress. And we have to wait a bit to what to happen then. I think the natural thing, in my opinion, the natural thing that will happen in the next couple of months, I don't think it's going to be anytime soon. I think it's going to be It's going to take a bit of time, and will be, I forgot the name of the word now, but it's going to be like in a long period of time, taking like sporadically, improving. It's going to be improving a bit sporadically. And with seafarers being able to join the vessels with like borders being a bit more borders opening, even with the restrictions, with a few restrictions. So seafarers being able to join the vessel, seafarers being able to go back to their houses, which can flag many supplier states are actually working for it, because obviously a national from one state can always fly back home to their states. The problem is finding flights. So there is this actually initiative to actually see if they could charter flights to fly back the seafarers. But then there's problematic that seafarers are all over the world, not necessarily just in one particular port. And seafarers might actually have a lot of restrictions staying in the country for a long period of time. We have the seafarers who face quarantine in that particular country if they're allowed in, and also go back and have been quarantined in their own countries. So it is problematic at this time, but we can see that the ship industry, the ship community is doing their best to keep trade going and do the utmost best that they can in terms of providing the best for seafarers and best protections. It hasn't affected only seafarers, if you put it out there, or Port State Authority. It has affected the whole industry as a whole. Shipyards have been closed, especially the Chinese ones, or they're just not functional. So we have that the industry had suffered a severe impact of Corona. Seafarers were no exclusion. They are suffering right now, but hopefully once these end, the rights to actually, they will have the rights in terms of payment, in terms of everything. Let's hope that the case of mental distress are not, there are not so many cases of mental distress. And let's hope that by isolating themselves, keeping the crew, because when you talk about seafarer isolation, it's really isolation. That's what it's thanks about it. That once this whole thing in isolation is able to be over, like seafarers will be safe, and because there is isolation, hopefully it'll be unlikely that they will get COVID, even though there has been a couple of cases, not only cruise ship, but also cargo vessels, where the whole crew was contaminated with Corona. So it is a problem. There is no denying out there. But I do think in terms of port state control and port authorities, they're really working their best to be flexible, to understand the needs that we currently have, to be more laxative in terms of in terms of inspections. So hopefully we are going to see improvement in a couple of months. Perhaps not a full improvement, but we are going to be a better scenario for seafarers and for trade in general. I think this is all that I would like to say. I hope you appreciate. These were my views. This was my views combined with a bit of the facts. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope it was clear enough. Thank you, and keep yourself safe.